It's unethical. Too many of the teachers that are teaching poor children of color fall into what a colleague of mine in math education calls the "you poor dear" syndrome. You don't have much money in your family. You poor dear. You only have one parent at home. You poor dear. You never been to the beach. You poor dear. The problem with this syndrome is not only the teacher focuses their energy on sympathizing, but that sympathy turns into a set of excuses for why they cannot expect much academically from these students. In a research project on early literacy that my colleague Mary Louise Gomez and I conducted, I came across a classroom where an African-American first grader refused to do her work each day. And this just kind of freaks me out. Somebody 6 gonna tell you what they ain't gonna do. I'm like, you 6. You about to do something. You just 6. But every day this kid just wasn't gonna do anything. And so every day the teacher would ask her what she was gonna do, and she would say, I'm not doing nothing. And every day the teacher would say, well, maybe you'll feel like it tomorrow. I term this attitude on the part of the teacher permission to fail. It is contrasted with what teachers seem to do with white middle-income students, and that is they demand success. My old friend and colleague Howard Fuller always says that poor black kids have as much right to be stressed out about school as rich white kids. Much right to be taking antidepressants, worried about whether they're going to get into the right college, right? But this sense that they're fragile, we can't challenge them intellectually, is at the root of that kind of thinking. Okay, these children are not ready for school. I know this point is particularly sensitive to those in the early childhood education community, but I think it's one that we cannot avoid. Increasingly, we are hearing people talk about children not being ready for kindergarten. What does it mean to be ready to begin school? Whatever happened to being 5 years old, and being able to make it to the bathroom 3 out of 5 times as a prerequisite for kindergarten? I'm not saying they have to do 5 out of 5, but the people of my generation ain't making it 5 out of 5. Y'all think those weekends is in the store for some great big babies? Grown folk can't make it 5 out of 5. But now what we hear is that children who don't know their colors and don't know their shapes and they don't know how to count from 1 to 20 and how to recite the alphabet are not ready to attend school. What are they supposed to do? Indeed, if their parents don't care and they lack experiences or exposure, how is staying home in that environment supposed to get them ready for school? More important, when did we adopt all of these rules about what it takes to begin? If you cannot count or identify colors, doesn't it seem that school would be an excellent place to teach those skills? So we now have a curious phenomenon that says if you come to school not reading, you get treated as if you have no right to be in school. And while the age for starting school varies throughout the world, interesting enough, most of the Scandinavian countries start their children at about age 7. David mentioned that I have an honorary degree from Umeå. I've done a lot of work with folks in northern Sweden. Don't ask. But they don't send their kids to school until they're about 7 or 8 years old. And, you know, I talk to parents there, they say, why would you wreck a perfectly good childhood by sending them to 5? You could be having some fun at 5. You know, my favorite is actually Australia, when you go on your birthday. I love that, you know, because I just imagine that every night there are some group of mothers going, you going tomorrow? I'm so out of here tomorrow. I do not care that it is, March 14th, living. But these are very arbitrary things. They're not fixed in stone, and yet we think, because of the way we do it, that that's the way it has to be. We might be really setting some unrealistic timelines for what kids can and should be doing at age 5. As I mentioned, the Scandinavians go around 7 or 8, but they're not behind us academically. So there's nothing magic, I think, about saying 5 is the point at which you go. And what 5 ought to represent and what you ought to be able to do when you're 5 years old, I think is still a point of discussion for us. Interestingly, the most affluent parents have the luxury of doing what Grau and DePerna call academic redshirting. This means that they have the resources, both human and physical, to hold their children out of school for a year. By doing so, their children enter school physically, mentally, and emotionally ahead of their peers, because keeping them out of school does not mean that they do nothing for a year. Instead, these are children who enjoy additional advantages such as travel and enrichment activities and time to mature. When they do enter school, their parents seek a kindergarten curriculum that is academically more rigorous. And because schools seem to work so hard to court middle-class students, their parents actually exercise an inordinate influence over school. So I've kept my kid out for a year. I've taken him to London and Paris and all around the world. We've been to museums and we've had all this stuff. I don't want no counting to wonders. I want you to teach my kid French. And because you want me to stay in the school, you often accede to my wishes. But then what does that do to low-income kids who haven't had these advantages? So that's my point. So once again, what happens is the children with the least resources end up receiving the least academic support. So it appears that this achievement gap that we bemoan is actually something that we help to create. These families don't value education. Well, this is a powerful myth that I think continues to live in schools. Yet by every indicator, we can see that poor families of color, actually place a higher value on education than more education-savvy parents. And what I mean by that is that the poor pay more of their tax dollar towards education. The poor are the primary targets for products like Hooked on Phonics and other very expensive academic supports. I mentioned that I like to spend a lot of time in school, and as I come across schoolyards, you can't help but listen to kids. And even in this day and age, kids still play an age-old game that I used to call, my friends used to call the dozens. They don't call it that anymore. They call it rapping and capping and toasting and that kind of Jones and okay. But the idea is you just talk about somebody's mother. Okay. And I'm coming across a schoolyard, and these kids are going at it, and one kid says, "Your mama's hooked on crack." And the other kid turned around and said, "Well, your mama's hooked on phonics." And I had to get in that one. I said, and that one is the worst one, because we ain't got no rehab for that. But that's who spends money on this kind of stuff, the poor, because they are desperate for their kids to get a leg up. The poor are deeply committed and invested in education as the primary vehicle for lifting them out of poverty. The rich often see education as a credentialing mechanism. They know it's important to go to the right school and get the right teachers, and ultimately to get into the right colleges. The poor naively believe that school is school, and as long as their children get decent grades, they have a chance to escape the